We got Richard Brouwer and Tom Chopin, familiar faces for many, I'm sure. Both have been involved in the local sport fishing industry in many capacities over the years. Currently, Tom is serving as a general manager at Freedom Tackle, and Rich is an ambassador with Pure Fishing. So we're happy everyone was able to make the time on this Friday night. Not too difficult right now, I guess. Not a lot going on. There is a Leaf game on, so that might take away a few guys tonight. But
must be a lot of non-Leaf fans here.
Yeah, maybe. So, so yeah, basically we're just gonna start throwing, just to keep things simple. We're gonna focus just on the Canadian shoreline and the Canadian season, even though there is year-round opportunities with the New York side and everything. So, if for people who haven't used Zoom yet, everybody is on mute. If you have any questions that you want to ask at any point, there's a chat function on the bottom of your screen, depending how you have your screen set up. So you can hit that and ask a question, and then one of us will see it and we'll answer it when the timing is right. So there'll be plenty of time for questions throughout the evening. I think we're ready to go then. I got everything I want it. So, Tom and Richard, I guess you guys have kind of talked a little bit of how you wanted to go about it. So, Tom, why don't you start off? The season, generally opens, near the end of June, and how is it that what do you look for, and how do you generally begin your season?
Well, a lot depends on the water temperature in any given year. How much ice we have this year. I just read today that Lake Erie is still 36 degrees. So it looks like doubtful we'll have a heavy snowpack or ice pack. So I think that means that the water will warm sooner and the fish will spawn sooner this year. Sometimes around opener, there are still some fish on beds when we have a really harsh winter, and they haven't got their business done by time the season opens. So typically on opener, we're gonna try and leave those spawning fish if we find them alone, and kind of back off into what I kind of break Lake Erie into 3 zones, which I kind of feel the same way. You kind of have that kind of 12-foot and under zone, and then you kind of have that 12 to 25-foot zone, and then you have the 25-foot plus zone. So we'll keep referring to these zones as we go through the meeting, because it changes throughout the year, but there's opportunities in all the zones, and you'll fish them all a little differently as well.
Yeah, I mean, Tom and I talked about this. There's resident fish in each zone, so those fish are going to stay in the same area all year. And then there's transient fish. We've always found that the bigger fish, they seem to be more transient in nature. That's why late in the fall, like right down into the end of November, we're getting big 5-6 pound fish, but they're all in 38 to 42, 45 feet of water. However, there's always fish that live shallow year round. And by shallow in Lake Erie, we're talking, 12 feet to 2 feet of water, and they're there all year.
Right. That's kind of interesting sidebar. That's neat that you mentioned that for the bass. For the walleye, it's a little different. Our bigger fish, the 10 pounders and bigger, they seem to be natural fish, and it's the migrating fish are the smaller ones generally, and those are the ones that come from the western part, Ohio, and the Michigan corner there on the lake. That's neat.
Yeah, you're right, Mark, because I mean, in years past, what used to be the 444, which is now run by Dave Malloy out of Erie Tracker. I can't remember the name of the tournament, but the last 2 or 3 years, all of the big fish have come under 15 feet of water. There's some big walleye hanging in there. I mean, and the reason that the walleye are there, the reason the bass are there, I mean, the bass are there first thing in the spring to spawn, but they're also there because there's bait, and there's a lot of bait, and there's a lot of food to eat. So different times of the year, we use different presentations. spring of the year, or I guess by the time it's bass season, it's almost July. That's about the only time of the year that I really work a topwater kind of presentation. Something like a chopper, the Berkeley chopper, or what's the name of this one? The Walker 100. That's another Berkeley bait. You can use them, and you'll call up fish in anywhere right to 15 feet of water.
Yep. So usually that time of year, right after the spawn, the bigger fish are going to start to move out. So if you want to target the bigger ones, we're going to look in that 12 to 25 foot range as the fish start to move out. But like Richard said, I love shallow water fishing, so I will fish Lake Erie shallow all season long. I just think it's so much fun, and so many different ways you can catch them. As you get out deeper, your options for presentations, they lessen a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of the times in the shallow water too, you can use stuff like jerk baits. I've seen a guy like Charles Sim. I've actually had the opportunity to fish with him, and he was calling fish out of 20 feet of water, and he's 5-6 feet down with the jerk bait. Now, mind you, the guy is incredibly good with the jerk bait, and I'm just kind of scratching the surface, learning it. But for the most part, as the fish goes deeper, Tom's right. Then there's different techniques that we seem to use more frequently than we would in shallow water.
Yeah, early on in the year, I'm gonna tend to use a lot more moving baits if I can. I'm gonna go throw spinner baits, chatter baits, jerk baits, and I'll throw those right out, like Richard said, into 20 feet of water. We've had a couple of times where we've gotten on schools of fish, and they'll come up and hit a jerk bait in 25 feet of water. And it depends what they're feeding on, if they're feeding up or feeding down. We all know gobies are the big forage base there. So you always have to kind of adjust and figure out if they're feeding on those bait fish, they're feeding on the gobies, because that's basically the only two food sources. I think since the gobies came in, any crayfish diet for the smallmouth has kind of disappeared. And it's really become goby based. I think that's what's allowing them to get so big and fat as well. A goby is just a big ball of protein. There's very little bones or cartilage to them, and the bass love them, and they're plentiful. So just what we're talking about, the gobies, I do find when we get out into your fishing tubes and drop shots, and so we're gonna, you really have to use your electronics out on Lake Erie. You're going to look for any changes in the bottom. It's going to be rock piles to sand, and boulders to small rocks, depth changes. Electronics have really opened up our eyes on Lake Erie and what you're looking for, but also that forage. So I find when I'm fishing tubes and drop shots, I'll find a good area and I'll throw those out. If I'm not getting the goby bites, I find I don't get the bass bites. And
yeah, gobies mean fish, right?
Yeah, the reason is it's food, and we spending a lot of time out there. We start to see it almost seems like the smallmouth will come in and they'll feed heavily in an area and almost wipe out the gobies. And then so today you're getting them here. 2 days from now, you got to go 100, 200 yards down the shore. Because the food has moved or they've eaten it all. We're not 100% sure because we don't live down there, but it feels like they will come into a rock pile and just feed and feed and feed, and you'll catch and catch and catch, and then that spot is kind of done for a couple weeks till a new crop of gobies move back in again.
Interesting.
Yeah, Tom, you were mentioning about electronics, and in today's day and age, the electronics are absolutely incredible. One of the things that has been invented or come into existence in the past 5 to 7 years is side scanning technology. Your traditional sonar has got your 2D, and then you've got your down imaging, but the side imaging, I am at the bottom of the learning pool when it comes to electronics, but the guys that I fish with, the guys that I fish some of these clubbies and tournaments with, they relied so much on their side scan. And what they're looking for rock and mud, or mud and sand transition lines. And for some reason, when you're going from a sand to a mud, or a mud flat to a bunch of rocks, the fish sit on those edges. We see it all of the time when we're in shallow water. If anything, like the water's so clear, at anything less than 12 feet of water, it's like you're at the tank at Bass Pro Shop. And whenever you see boulders up in a line, you can almost be guaranteed there's going to be fish sitting in the shadows of those boulders. And you can't see them. They're incredible. But once you start pitching to them, I use a lot of little tiny stuff first thing in the spring and in the shallow water. The one thing Tom and I talked about earlier, in the shallow water, we get a lot of that weed growth that's really slimy and gross, and it makes it really tough, for me anyways, to throw something like a Ned rig, or something that's going to bounce on the bottom like a tube. If you're fishing a tube in July in 12 feet of water, you're constantly going to be taking the slimy weed off of there. And that's where a technique like a drop shot really comes into play.
Yeah, that's a big part of why I use moving baits a lot that time of year, because you don't want to touch bottom. You want to have stuff off bottom to stay away from that moss. And that moss usually hangs around for a couple of weeks, and it's a real pain, but you can still fish through it. So just we were touching on the electronics there. So the closing of the border has kind of made me revisit some of my fall hunts. So we kind of talked about the spring, as those fish move out, they hang out in that deeper 12 to 25 foot range. But then in the fall, those big fish that have been out cruising with the walleyes move back into to feed and get fat. And then they all kind of start to work their way out into that 40, 50 foot range, where you'll find the big schools and the bigger fish come in. So I used to fish a lot between Port Colborne and Port Abino years ago when I first joined the Niagara Bass Masters and with the St. Catharines Club. But over the last 10 years, the American side in the fall has been the place to be to get bigger fish. You used to be able to get them really good off of Port Colborne, and then it kind of disappeared. Well, this year, not being able to go, we started to revisit some of the places we haven't been for a while. And I got waypoints that are 12 and 15 years old that I've transferred from my old handheld GPS onto units every year. I move them onto the new units in the boat. So this year, going back around saying, okay, let's go visit that old waypoint. I used to catch them good here. And now I go by that waypoint with my side imaging, and I'm seeing exactly what Richard was just talking about. That spot was a transition. It was a break. I would just put in new waypoints, and every new waypoint was beside one of my old waypoints. So back in the day, we just kind of, trial and error. You catch a fish, you mark a spot. So now the electronics are allowing you to find those spots a lot quicker. You used to have to spend years and years finding spots, and I know it perturbs some of the guides out there too, because a novice angler can go out and spend a few days sign imaging and find all the juice that it took these guides years to find that spot on the spot kind of thing.
Or you can do what I did.
So it's kind of interesting.
You could buy graphs off Tom, like I did 5 years ago, and I got all of his waypoints, every single one of them. So thanks, Tom. I appreciate that.
No problem. So let's just talk about those depth ranges and lures. So Richard alluded to a little bit in the shallow waters. Like I said, I love shallow waters. A lot of those shallow water waypoints I have are just rock piles or a single boulder that's in the middle of nowhere. So those are a good history to build. So if you find a rock by itself or one of the shipwrecks that's out there, mark it, because it's always going to be a spot that's going to hold a fish at some point. So when I do my shallow water, I'll just put the trolling motor down and I'll go, but I'm basically hopping from waypoint to waypoint to waypoint, which is really a rock to a rock pile to a transition. So I'm constantly moving, but I'm able to cast at those targets now with the you know, when I see that waypoint coming up, I can tell it's so many feet ahead of me. And so I'm firing out. Usually it's a moving bait at first. So like I said, spinner baits, jerk baits. One bait that I added to my repertoire this year was the spy bait. So it's one I've heard about a lot of years. It's a very finessey technique. So I kind of, you know, just kept with my power fishing stuff. But this year, every year I try and challenge myself to learn a new technique or a new style of fishing. And spy baits was it for this past year. And they come in usually, there's like 100 size, there's a 90 size, all the way down to like a little 75 size. So what you do with a spy bait is really you just cast it out, you kind of count it down close to bottom, and then it's just a constant retrieve. You don't have to jerk it, you don't have to twitch it, you just constantly wind, and that bait does a little body shimmy, and those blades give off a little vibration, and I was blown away, you know, by how well it worked for me, and I fell in love with this bait really quick this summer because we were catching some big fish and good numbers on it when some of those power techniques weren't working. I don't know if they've seen them too much, but it was something new and something different. So with those, go ahead, Richard.
Go ahead, Tom.
So with those power techniques, when sometimes you will draw followers in. So that's when you got to be ready to throw back at them. Smallmouths are not shy. I've been, you know, in the 5, 6, 7 feet of water in 3-foot waves with the trolling motor coming out and the water and splashing back down, and smallmouth will just sit right underneath the boat. It's like they're not spooky in a lot of cases, but I also find those guys to be the tough ones to catch sometimes. So now you're going to throw back. I always have a second rod ready. I always leave it like open and hanging off so I can grab it really quick and throw it in really quick. So I'll have a drop shot set up usually, and then a lot of times a tube. So what's changed a little bit for me is traditionally, you know, everybody's seen the 4.5-inch tube, but I've really started to like these little 2.5-inch tubes. So you can put the same size weights in them, but now you have that smaller profile. And a lot of these baits, instead of being half and half, these are actually about 60% tail and 40% body. So it gives you a lot more action, but it's something small, something bite size, and a little different than what the fish have seen before.
So Tommy was talking about scaling down. And for us old guys in the group here, and I see a couple of gray beards, what's old is new again. And we can remember when we were young, a black bucktail was everything. So this is a Freedom bucktail, and it's got the swivel head on it. It's a 1/8 ounce, and this is something that I'll keep ready to go when I'm using the jerk bait or using the top water, and you see a second fish come in, or you see a fish that's down right down below the boat. 1/8 ounce, it goes down really slow, and you can work it fairly easily and keep it out of the slop. Like I said, when I was a kid, 45 years ago, my dad used to take us out there. We used to go to Canadian Tire, and we used to buy a whole cardboard card of 1/4 ounce black bucktails. But now I'm using this Freedom one with the swivel head, and it's working very, very well.
Yeah, that's a kind of a quiet bait out on tour. A lot of the guys fishing the St. Lawrence River and some of the big
100%
fisheries out in Wisconsin and Minnesota. But the way you fish that bucktail is you never let it touch bottom. You always want to be constantly reeling, just like the spy bait almost. It's just a constant, steady retrieve, anywhere from halfway down to 3/4 of the way down in the water column, and just a straight retrieve. And there's just something about it undulating like a leech. I envision that it mimics the closest. But it's one that a lot of the tournament guys are using, and you know, a lot of guys will tie their own, but that, you know, you can also get them ready with you know, a pre-purchased product.
Nice. Hey Tom, just about the spy bait, what's the reaction from the fish? Do they smash that bait, or is it a picky bite?
I've had both. There's days where it's just you almost felt like you just hit a weed, and you just keep reeling, and then, you know, all of a sudden there's some weight there. And then I've had some where it almost tore the rod out of my hand. I think it just depends on the mood of the fish on any given day. But
So Tom was talking about keeping these baits moving. And one of the baits that is probably the simplest bait in the world to use is a swim bait. And a lot of guys, they look at this thing and they're thinking like, well, there's not really much to it. So this is a swim bait. This has got a 3/4 ounce football head on it. This is the Berkeley swim bait. That's called, I think that's called Sassy Shad, that color. But the reason that I like using the swim bait is, especially with the football head, when it hits the bottom, if you do hit the bottom, it's not going to fall over on its side. It's going to stand on its head because that's the way the bait's designed. So it's not going to fall over this way. It's going to stand on its head and stand up because the tail is buoyant. But this is a bait that is literally huck it and reel it, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else to it. The one nice thing about Lake Erie, if you're not fishing tournaments, you can fish 2 rods. So a swim bait, you can throw this out there and you can just let it drag along and let the tail do the magic, and the bass will hammer it. Another fish that will really hammer it is the sheephead. Sheephead loves swim baits. But if you're catching sheephead, don't move, because the sheephead are there for a reason. They're eating gobies and they're eating zebra mussels. But if sheephead are there, bass are there. Don't leave if you're catching sheephead.
Yeah, you really do find that they get mixed now, and the sheephead population out there is crazy now. But so just what Richard was talking about that. So there's kind of 2 schools of thought on Erie, as far as the guys that like to spot lock and video game fish. So they're looking at their electronics. They see a fish, they drop down to it. Very vertical presentation. But then there's also the kind of horizontal presentation, I'm going to call it. Sometimes it's the wind. So if you got those, windy days out there, setting up a drift to cover a good section of water. And that drift could be, going down the break. So you're starting in 19 and taking that break out to 25 feet of water, or working across a point like Windmill Point. You can kind of go from deeper water up shallower and then back down again. So you can kind of cover some water drifting. And then when it's really, really calm out there, we do what we call strolling, where you're moving around on the electric. And so you can kind of, with those 2 rods that you're allowed to use, outside in tournaments, we have to use 1 rod, but in fun fishing, you can use 2 rods. So if you are strolling around, you can drag that 1 rod out behind the boat and then have a second rod where you're kind of throwing ahead of the boat or throwing at marks that you see straight down. So it kind of gives you the best of both worlds. And sometimes it pays to sit on a really good piece of structure if you've got a lot of marks there. And then other times it pays to kind of cover water until you find the fish.
Yeah, and once you do find the fish, then it's game on. I fished a tournament, I think it was the 2nd week of November, just a small 9-boat tournament. Our 6 fish weighed 26.10. So we had better than a 5-pound average. And we came in 5th place. 29 pounds won it. And a lot of the guys were strolling. They were moving their swim baits at 0.9 to 1.2 miles an hour. But other guys are throwing in, they're trolling crankbaits. And you're thinking, well, crankbaits, that's crazy. Well, they make crankbaits now that will, we can hit bottom in 34 feet of water. I've got one here that is tied onto my bait caster. And we should remark that all of these baits that we're talking about, Grimsby Tackle's got them. As a matter of fact, I told Mark about this bait. Tom, you'll recognize that one.
Yep.
Tom and I fished the Canadian Tire Open, which was an 85 or 80 or 85 boat bass tournament. And we came in 10th on this lure. It'll go down to 34 feet. It's called the 25 or 26.5. It's called the Berkeley Dredger. It's inexpensive. It's about $9. In the summer, you'll knock the snot out of the walleye on them, but the bass love them too. The bass really, really love them. So if you're seeing these sand rock transitions on your graph. Don't be afraid to fire out a crankbait. I've got it on fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon sinks, but you can run it on braid. If you're going to run it deep, don't run it on mono, because mono is going to float and you're going to get a bow in your line, and you're not going to realize the true depth of what this lure can do. But yeah,
I'll cast and retrieve that lure too up in that 15 to 20 foot zone, because that way you're really hammering bottom, and I think it's a little bit more of a reaction bite from some of the fish that might not be in a feeding mood, but they see something go by pretty quick and erratic, and they're going to strike at it.
Yeah, we've had lots of there's lots of fish out there that are very line shy, that hate noise, that hate boats. And Tom's been talking about the trolling motor coming up out of the water and slamming back down. When I was a kid, my dad used to take a quarter-inch polypropylene rope and a piece of chain and drag the chain across the bottom. And he used to kick up all the stuff on the bottom, and the bass would come zooming right up into the chain. They're very inquisitive creatures. This thing's got a huge knock to it. And Tom's right. It's a reaction bait, because this thing's whacking on the bottom. If this is a 26 footer and I'm throwing it in 15 feet of water, it's going to be hammering the bottom, and the fish they'll just load up on it. There's no soft bites with something like this. It's like rip it, because they're gonna hammer it.
Yeah, when I'm doing the strolling out in Erie, I tend to go to a fiberglass crankbait rod that's longer, like a 7.2 to a 7.10. It's going to give you that bit of shock absorber. I prefer to fish it on braided line. I don't know why. I just do. I find if I get snagged, I can pop it out. But with braided line not having any stretch, I compensate that with a softer rod than I might use, say, for a drop shot or a tube.
Yeah, one of the pros out there, Stephen Browning, and he's fished on the bass circuit and all throughout North America. He uses a straight fiberglass rod, and it's like old school, guys. It's like a real slow action rod, but it gives him that ability that he's not yanking hooks out when he's throwing these big crankbaits. It's the same thing. Like if there's any kind of signature series rod out there, like a Mike Iaconelli, the Ike series, his crankbait rod, I've got one of them. It's got a really, really soft tip, and it's kind of weird to get used to, because we're so used to having fast or very fast tips on our rods. But Tom's right. The softer rod, you don't pull hooks out.
Yeah, it makes a difference. So those are kind of the stuff that we do in that summer transition, when you're in that middle zone, I'm going to call it. And then as we get into the fall and then those big fish start to come back in, I find in like September, you can get some big fish up shallow. They're coming up to feed, so they bulk up for the winter. So you'll find that they'll come right into that 5-6 feet of water. So you're kind of hitting some of that summer spots, but you're also can hit the deeper water where they're coming in. And then later in the season, as we get towards the end of October, that's our favorite time of the year to fish out there, just because the big fish stack up. And when you get on a good pot of them, they're all good fish. The one thing I find even just throughout the whole year on Erie is that the fish will stack up and group up by size. So if you're catching a bunch of 2-pound smallmouth, in that 12, 14 feet of water, the chances of you catching a 5-pounder is pretty slim. You may catch a 3. If you're on a school of 4-pounders, you may catch a 5-pounder. So it's kind of as tournament guys, it was one of the toughest things I've ever had to learn is leaving fish to find fish. I mean, you're on a good school, you're catching lots, but lots doesn't win you tournaments. So sometimes you got to leave those 2-3 pounders and try and find that school of 5-pounders, because that's what's going to help us win a tournament out there. So it's hard to do when you're whacking them good, but it's definitely something you have to keep in mind if you're looking for those trophy fish. If you just want to have fun, you can sit on that school of 2-3 pounders all day long and have lots of fun with them, especially if you're bringing new people out fishing, kids and stuff. I mean, when I was guiding out there, I'd have some people catch a 3-pound smallmouth, and it was the fish of a lifetime for them. they had never caught a smallmouth or one that big. They're used to catching little 12-inch smallmouth. So you just have to kind of keep that in perception when you're bringing new people out or trying to do something different. Just look for those schools of fish that are going to match what you really, really need.
It's interesting that you say that, Tom, because we're so incredibly spoiled here in the Niagara region, whether it's the upper or the lower or Lake Erie, especially. Like Tom and I have fished. Help me out with those name here. Lake Chickamauga, Tom, right?
Chickamauga, yeah.
Yeah, Chickamauga. We were literally lining up, waiting to fish a brush pile, or going along the shore. There was like 6 boats in front of us going along the shoreline. So we're like number 7. When you got to the launch ramp, everybody thinks, the fishing is so incredible. A 2-fish day there is good. A 5-fish day is incredible. Out on Lake Erie, if you get 5 fish for a day, we're shaking our heads like, we want to throw all our fishing rods and take up golf or something silly like that. We have to remember that our fishery is so incredible. So if you get your kids or your grandkids or some newbie out there and they hook into an 8-pound sheephead, they're going to have the most fun of their entire life trying to land this sheephead. It's Tom, you got one in the Bay of Quinte. Wasn't it 24 pounds or something crazy like that?
I didn't get it that big, but I had big ones down there, double digits. But Aaron Shirley caught one down there that was 24.
Oh, that's who it was. Okay, it was Aaron. Yeah, yeah. So, and the fishing's it's right there, guys. Literally, if you put your boat in Crystal Beach, you could literally start catching fish within 300 feet of that ramp. There's one spot there. So, and all the way out.
Yeah, we're very lucky in this area. I've traveled down south, and like Richard said, we feel bad with a 10-fish day because we didn't catch 40, but and especially the Niagara River. I mean, you're catching muskies and walleyes and rainbows and everything in there. It's pretty incredible. So I just want to pull back to the fall fishing again. So as we get onto those deeper fish, we get into my favorite territory, which is the jigging spoon and blade bait bite. We get a little bit of this in the early season. You can get some fish. Typically, on the U.S. side, we get to be out there a little earlier where that bite is good, but you can kind of catch the tail end of that in the deeper spots on the Canadian side as well. But in the fall, once those fish start moving out to that 30, 40, even 50 feet of water, it comes time for a blade bait. And I don't know how many guys have fished a blade bait. So the Freedom brought this one out last year. What makes it a little different is that the hook is attached to the top of the head. So what that allows you to do is you can tap bottom with it, and there's a lot less snagging on bottom. Traditionally, a blade bait, you're gonna let it hit bottom, and then you're gonna rip it up. And a lot of times when you rip up a blade bait, they'll flip over when they flash, and sometimes they'll snag up on your line. So this new style kind of eliminates some of those tangles. But it's such a fun bite. You'll be like, hit the bottom, let it sit for 2-3 seconds, rip it up, let it hit bottom 2-3 seconds, and you go to rip up, and it's like you hook the plug of the lake. You just got this big heavy weight there, and it almost rips your arm off. It's there's no better feeling than that for me in the fall, just getting on that bite, and you go to rip up, and it doesn't move.
Just a question on that, Tom. Your cat, just to get things straight for some people who may not be familiar with that type of fishing, you're casting them out as far as you can, or do you just pitch them a bit and let them hit bottom?
If it's not windy, I'll cast them out and then rip them back to the boat. If I see something on the graph that's interesting, I'll drop straight down to them. Okay. So you can kind of do a little bit of both. But I do like covering the water a little bit better with it.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of setup do you like for that?
I'm throwing mostly at spinning rods out on Erie. So I tend to go heavier, even my drop shotting. So typically I'm going to run a 2000 or 2500 size reel.
Tommy.
10 feet a leader.
Uh-oh. Tommy didn't pay his hydro bill, Mark.
My internet's getting a little shaky here. You hear
Ah,
me?
there you go. Anyways,
I'm giving out the secrets, and then it starts to go.
Yeah. Okay, so Tom was talking about the size of
That's
reels.
really me doing that.
Yeah, the size of reels and stuff like that. It depends on what reel you own. This is a Fluger President. This is actually a 35 size. It's big. The reason I like it, you can really pick up line fast. That's just spooled with 8-pound fluorocarbon. This rod is a Abu Garcia Veracity. It's 7.3. It's got a really fast tip, but it's really stiff. And one of the nice things about these rods, when you're using jigging spoons or any of that, you're normally ½ ounce, 3/4 of an ounce, up to an ounce. You need that backbone to be able to rip that jig up in deep water, and you also need it to stick the fish. So the heavier action rods are really designed for that kind of thing. I also use the heavier action rods if I'm dragging a tube out there. I want to be able to see the rod.
I tend to use a lot of medium. I tend to use a lot of medium heavy unless I'm drop shotting. Then I'll go to that little medium action rod.
Yeah.
But a thought out there that a lot of guys like light. They think they need to go to a 6-pound leader to get bites or an 8-pound leader. To me, the fluorocarbon, the big selling feature is it disappears underwater. So if it's disappearing and I have a choice between 6 and 8 pound or 10, I'm going with the 10. Just because I feel it gives me that opportunity to land more fish. Where some guys think you'll get a few more bites if you go to lighter line. So one thing about fishing is you can line up 10 guys and you're going to get 10 different opinions. And that's why, we have a whole tackle store with a lot of options because you have to figure out what feels good to you and what you have confidence in.
Yeah, reiterating what Tom said, as far as line size goes, I never use 6-pound test, but my tournament partner sometimes is using 5-pound test. I always use 8-pound. I like to use leader, but it's not 100% necessary. You can use fluorocarbon line. You just really have to check for nicks. Lake Erie is absolutely crammed with zebra mussels, and they will nick your line up. Just make it a habit that after you catch a fish to check your line, especially if you're drop shotting. You can always, tie it and retie it. Now, the way I use a drop shot rod is I'll have braid. This is Berkeley X9, 8-pound braid in white. And then I'll have about 8 to 10 feet of fluorocarbon line. You don't really need 8 to 10 feet, but if you have it, you can always trim it back and, go from 10 feet to 8 feet to 7 feet to 6 feet. So you don't have to constantly retie during the day. These hands, they don't work the way they used to. And tying a double uni knot or an FG knot in the middle of Lake Erie in 3-foot waves doesn't bode well with me. So I try to pre-tie the night before, and then I'll shorten my leads as I need it. And then sometimes I have an extra rod and I'll just start using the other rod. So I don't have to do the dreaded double uni knot.
How about you, Tom? Swivel or uni knot?
Uni to uni. Yeah. I think so. It's easier to tie them in your garage when there's no wind and no cold so I do the same thing. I'll have 6 or 8 rods tied up, and if my leader gets to down to 2-3 feet, I'll just put that rod away until I absolutely have to retie it, and it just allows you to be a little more efficient on the water.
Mark, does anybody have any questions out there that we can lie to them about?
A couple popping in, and I've kind of been asking them a bit as they have been coming. So, but no, certainly, just a reminder for those that may have just joined, just use the chat function on the bottom there, and you can type in a message, and we'll get to it when we can. Maybe let's talk about. I know, as good as the Upper Niagara River is, it certainly does play second fiddle to the lake. And generally, most guys don't fish the river unless the lake is blowing up. But maybe for those that want to try and pick apart the river, during the summer months, I know it can be tough with the floating weeds and whatnot in there, but maybe a couple starting points and presentations for just some people who are exploring and just want to catch a few fish.
There's no fish at all in the upper river. Don't fish there at all. Listen, this year we had the Canadian Tire Open. The lake was blown off. There was 80 boats on the upper river, and I fished with Tom, and we said, like, we're going to be on top of each other. There was barely 3 boats in our sight all day. That upper Niagara River is loaded full of fish. The biggest thing
we were just shy of 20 pounds, and we ended up 10th in the tournament. There was a lot of 22-pound bags. You go back 15 years in the Niagara River, and 14, 15, 16 pounds was a big bag out of the river, but you need 20 plus just to win a little clubby event. And I think that a big part of that is the gobies. The fish are just feeding. So.
Yeah, that was another day that I know at least 5 of the top 10 teams in that tournament were using big diving crankbaits like the Berkeley Dredgers. It was a day that was unbelievable as far as wind goes. We had 50 to 60 kilometer an hour sustained winds. We were actually getting blown sideways down the river. But the Niagara River so the upper Niagara River has 5 launch ramps. Okay, the one that's closest to the falls is going to be Chippewa, and the one that's closest to Lake Erie is Nichols, and then there's 3 in between. There is Miller's Marina, Frenchman's Creek, and one other one, Tommy, Black Creek, right?
They're Black Creek, and there's another one across from Navy Island too. Okay,
yeah. So there's there's lots of access. There's Navionics has got that upper river completely charted out perfectly. The nice thing about the upper Niagara is most of the water is Canadian water. Seldom are we going behind Grand Island on the American side when we could. The good spots, the majority of the good spots are in Canadian waters. So once again, you're looking for transitions. You're looking for holes, you're looking for reefs. And of course, on the upper Niagara River, current plays a huge factor. And the smallmouth are going to set up on the edge of current breaks as ambush points, and that's what you're looking for. It can be
probably the easiest lure to use in the Niagara River is a drop shot.
Yeah.
Because you can just tick bottom. But with boat control, you want your trolling motor pointed upriver, and you're going to keep touching your trolling motor to kind of slow the boat down to keep your drop shot as vertical as possible. If you get big bows in your line, you'll get snagged up.
Mm-hmm. Very similar to steelhead drifting.
Yeah. Normally, the surface speed of the water in the Niagara River is almost 2 knots faster than the speed on the bottom. So if you think of it that way, if you're drifting down the river, you're actually drifting faster than the current on the bottom. So what Tom was saying about putting the nose of your boat forward and slowing yourself down. On my Minn Kota Tarova, I put it at about a 3 and I keep it constant. I might go down to 2.5 out of the 10 on your dial. And that just gives you enough to slow it down. And like Tom says, you want to fish as vertical, straight up and down as possible, because when your line starts doing this and then starts doing this, your opportunity for snagging is much greater than if you're straight up and down like this. Let your drop shot hit the bottom. A lot of guys try to.
You don't have to worry about feeling the bite either. The fish in the river tend to hook themselves because you're just drifting with the current, and all of a sudden they're going to fight back. So if you're wondering if you're getting bites or not, you'll know it because the fish will almost always just hook themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you're drifting along at 2 or 3 miles an hour. If you actually took a hook and stuck it between your fingers here and pulled it 2 or 3 miles an hour, see how fast it buries into your hand. That's what's happening there. Those fish are grabbing it. And And there's all sorts of drop shot baits out there, guys. The Berkeley Maxent's been knocking it off the charts, but there's the American
new ones that I've been using, the set the hook.
Yeah,
Soft plastics, the drifter and the new drifter minnows out this year. So the thing that makes them a little different is they actually have eyes on them. And I really believe that eyes are targets to fish. So either on your jig head or on your soft plastic. And that kind of held true with the blade bait as well. When we're fishing this in the fall, we found that 95% of the fish were hooked on that front double hook in the roof of the mouth because they came in, grabbed the bait from the head, and the hooks are sitting right there. So just keep that in mind sometimes when you're looking for something a little different. Sometimes it might be an eye. Sometimes I'll just take a black Sharpie and I'll make a black dot on some eyes. Or on some don't have eyes.
Pull that drifter out of the package there and actually hold it up to the camera. The thing is almost identical to a juvenile goby.
This one's called LON goby. So, but yeah. So when you're fishing drop shots, a lot of guys think you need to get down there and shake it. It's almost better to do nothing. Just let that weight sit on bottom, and you can see just it doesn't take much. There's currents in the water. And it just takes that little bit of tail to create some action. So the one thing I started doing this past year, and it made sense when you start to think about it, is I'm throwing a goby presentation. The length of line between, typically with my drop shot weight and my hook, I'm going to use about 12 inches for most minnow-shaped baits, or if I'm imitating bait fish. But with a goby bait, you're actually better to knock it down to like a 3-4 inch leader between your hook and the weights, because gobies never swim. They're always on bottom. They'll hop around and maybe get a few inches off the bottom, but for the most part they're bottom dwellers. So you can shorten down that drop shot if you're sitting over top of them. One thing to keep in mind, if you're drifting and you have a lot of line out to maintain bottom, think of your line on an angle. So if you have a 12-inch leader, but you got a lot of line out, your line is actually pretty close to the bottom. When you're dragging a drop shot with if it's windy, we put a little more line out to get to the bottom. So just be cognizant of how far off bottom that your bait is actually traveling when you do get a fish. Are they feeding way up, or are they hitting it right on the bottom? The Mark said I didn't have to give any of my secrets away, but I gave a couple.
There's a freebie. Thanks. Those are some nice looking baits. We've got a lot on order coming into the shop.
Yeah, great for ice fishing. Anybody heading up to Lake Simcoe, the whitefish up there, that's what they're feeding on Lake Simcoe. Set the hook makes a little flatty jig that basically has the weight underneath that bait, so you can just hop that thing right on bottom and it sticks to the bottom. But the whitefish up there love gobies. So.
Okay.
If we ever get ice.
We got a couple questions that came in here. Chat, but I'll let you each maybe give an opinion. Is there a good all-purpose rod and reel combo that is well suited for both bass and walleye?
Can I take this one, Tom?
Sure.
Shameless plug for Pure Fishing Products. Tom and I actually discussed this. Everything that I've got here tonight, you can buy at Grimsby Tackle. One of the best-selling reels on the market for low cost is a Fluger President XD. This reel is $100, maybe 110.
Yep.
Fantastic reel for the money. For me, I love a 7'3" rod. I'll use it for walleye up north. I'll use it for walleye in Lake Erie. I'll use it for bass on Lake Erie. I like a medium action with a fast or extra fast tip. This is my new.
Talk about that for a second, Rich. So sometimes people hear fast tip and they're not 100% sure what it means. Fast is actually a softer tip. So if a fish hits that lure, that rod is going to bend faster because it's soft.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry.
The slow tip won't hardly bend at all. So I hear sometimes people have get that kind of mixed up between fast and slow.
So this is the fast tip. Okay. This is my new favorite rod in the world. It's a Fenwick Techna. It's a 7.3. It retails for about $200. But the nice thing about Fenwick is they've got rods anywhere from $70 to the Eagle with a 3-year warranty. Then you go to the HMX with a 5-year warranty. They're sitting at about 85.
Yeah, 85.
Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah, 85. And then the HMG's got a lifetime warranty, and you can buy that rod for $110 to $120. So if I'm going to buy a rod, one rod to use for bass, it's going to be minimum 7 feet. I'm going to have a reel that balances well with it. It's hard to say 2,500 or 3,500 because even in the flugers, the 35 size Patriarch is a different size than the 35 size President. So just something that balances well, and I put braid on it. Would you agree, Tommy?
Yep. I like 7.2s to 7.3 to, if it's bass, I'll go to a 7.6 even on some of the techniques, but all around, 7.2, 7.3 is going to get you multi-species. You can even use it in the lower Niagara River for rainbows if you needed to.
Mm-hmm. And one rod that's been selling well the last year in the shop, and that's just a little bit more, is the Bass X series from St. Croix. Not a terribly expensive rod for St. Croix standards, but still a really nice, well-made rod.
Yeah, St. Croix makes a really, really good product. I've had friends that have used St. Croix for years. They're really good. You know what? It comes down to, and it's kind of an old cliche, but you spend as much money as you possibly can that you can afford. I mean, don't be going out and taking bank loans. You don't need a Loomis NRX for $800, but you buy the best rod that you can afford. Most of the guys that I'm seeing here on camera, we're over 40, getting towards 50, some of us towards 60. Buy a rod that you're going to use for the rest of your life, guys.
Yeah.
Right? And when you're buying a more expensive rod, a $200 rod, it's guaranteed for life. So if you break it, it's going to cost you shipping to get it back to the plant. So buy the best one that you can afford.
Yeah, I mean, I fish for money, and I've never, I don't see value in a $500-600 rod. Maybe if you need one for 14-foot for noodle fishing, for river fishing or something. But when I got a boat full of rods, I find I can do $100 to $150 on a reel, a spinning reel, and usually $150 to $200 on a rod.
Another question we had come in here: do smallies always relate to the same types of structure in different depths? I've never gone deep like you were talking about in the 30 to 50 range.
Well, I'll give you another little thing. So over the years, I found Lake Erie's really changed. So you used to be able to go to a rock pile that nobody knew was there, and you could sit on that rock pile and catch your limit and call and have it all to yourself. Now with the electronics, everybody found the rock piles. So I think that pressure has made the fish move. So as we talked about earlier, that they tend to hang around these transitions now where it's the edges of something, the rock to sand. But we even find now, especially out in that deeper water, on your side imaging, you can see sand flats. And you'll actually see the ripples. They look like little waves on bottom of the sand. And sometimes the fish are out there using that for cover. So some of these ripples, we dropping the camera down, we see that they're, a foot and a half deep sometimes. And so that's a little canyon that these fish are sitting in. So it's, I think when you're shallower, you get a lot more rock and you get those little white shell beds. So if I see those white spots on the lake bottom or the Niagara River, the limestone patches, those are definitely key. As you get out deeper, it tends to be a little more slower taper, and then it's going to be more of a rock to sand transition.
Yeah, a lot of the times when we're catching these fish deep in the fall, you can actually see when you pick up the bass and you look at their belly sometimes even has dirt on it. They're literally, as Tom says, they're sitting in those little troughs, or they're sitting on the edge of transition points. we had one tournament that we fished that we were fishing this rock ridge, and we kept drifting over it. Every time we drifted over it, we would get a fish. So what we did, we actually switched to strolling so we could go down the edge of that ridge, and that was in 38 feet of water, and that's where the fish were sitting. They were sitting right on the edge. So there's no secrets anymore as far as structure out there. It's not like back in the old days where we used to have like a water bottle or a pop can, or the old handheld GPSs. With Navionics charts, everybody knows, everybody's got what the bottom is. It's now you're picking apart spots on spots. And when Tom says about these big sand flats, they could be 1 kilometer long. And there might be 20 or 30 bass spread over 1 kilometer, scattered on them.
So sometimes just on that too, like sometimes the color of the fish will tell you what they're relating to. So, fish coming from sand tend to be very washed out. They're just that kind of green color. Sometimes that's from the watercolor. If the water's dirty, they'll get washed out. But up shallow, you'll get these big black ones. And typically those fish are sitting in beside a rock or a crevice. So that sometimes can give you a little clue as well to, what are the fish relating to? If they're dark, they tend to be in the rocks. If they're lighter, they're on the sand.
Okay. If anyone has any more questions about anything, feel free to fire one. And just so everyone knows, I don't know if anybody's asked yet, you guys are both using Hummingbird units currently on your boats.
Yeah. Hummingbird for me, it's a user-friendly unit. It's inexpensive as far as the units go. But every single graph that's out there, whether it's Raymarine or Garmin or Lowrance or Hummingbird, they're fantastic, guys. The difference between them and our old SciTech paper graphs from only 20 years ago, it's astronomical how good these graphs are. Use your electronics, trust your electronics, and don't be afraid to put your rod aside and do some exploring with just your electronics, especially stuff like down imaging and side imaging. It's huge.
Yeah, so some of the best anglers out on Lake Erie will idle around for 4 hours and fish for 4 hours. They all where the fish are, and sometimes it can be boring at first, but if you've got your eyes and ears open and you're watching and learning, that's the important part. The trolling motor technology has made a difference as well for me with being able to spot lock now and just put it on continuous and control it with a remote control now. So the technology the last 5 years is just leaps and bounds, and everybody's trying to outdo each other now. The new stuff is the live scope. I haven't used it on Erie yet, but I had an opportunity. I was down in Oklahoma and we were fishing silver bass and watching these fish, school up on and moving they say, oh, there's the school. We cast to them. You can see your lure go through the school. You'd put at your lure, a jigging spoon in that usually they love, and the school dispersed. So that technology now allows you to see the mood of the fish. So, are they chasing baits? Are they being, really stubborn? So I mean, it's getting crazy, the amount of stuff, that you can do and see, but it shortens the learning curve immensely.
Yeah, it sure does. Mark, somebody had a question about a hair jig there.
Yep, just came in. Do you use a hair jig? When you use the hair jig, is it specifically cast and retrieve, or do you also use it as a type of finesse presentation?
Both. The one thing that Tom said about that hair jig is you got to keep it up off the bottom. It's got to look like a leech or a crayfish or something. But the hair, if it's getting on the bottom, especially in shallow water, it's going to foul up and it's going to be a greasy mess. But Tom talked about the use of electronics and dropping right down on the fish. A bucktail, a hair jig, or a marabou, they're deadly. I'm tying my own hand-tied bucktails for Lake Erie right now, 3/4 ounce, and they're almost 6 inches long. As long as the bucktail, the hair that I can find, and we're catching fish on them. So it's imitating the smell there, but the bucktail in the shallow water, it's just a leech pattern or a crayfish pattern or something like that.
Got a question, and any live bait presentations? I know you guys generally won't use that intentionally for smallmouth. I know it used to be a thing years ago. I read articles, especially during the fall, some guys would get some large minnows and they'd use slip sinker rigs and whatnot. This is like 15 plus years ago, though.
Yeah, we see the guides out on Lake Erie all the time, and there's days where we're drifting beside them and they're using live bait and they're out fishing us 10 to 1, and then there's days where the artificial tubes and drop shots are out fishing the live bait, but typically they're using kind of like a rainbow rig where they've got the dropper pencil and then a 3-4 foot back, just a minnow on a bare hook. Drifting, especially like drifts like through near the mouth of the Niagara River where the current picks up. That's a good spot to use that kind of a technique where you're keeping vertical, but you're dragging that. Those fish are just sitting there waiting for stuff to swim by them and eat. So.
Yeah, that kind of live bait presentation, they're almost exclusively using emerald shiners, although a lot of the American guides are also using spot tail shiners, which are a hardier version of the shiner. But it's really weird. Like Tom says, sometimes they're knocking the stuffing out of them on live bait, and other times we'll completely school them.
Yeah, that just reminded me one thing we didn't talk about at all was scent. I've been schooled a few times in my own boat by guys over the years, using scent when I wasn't, and it's something I don't leave home without now. Anytime I fish, my bait's got to have some kind of a scent. Those set the hook baits have garlic. I got spray bottles and other stuff that'll stick to a crankbait or a jerk bait. It's pretty amazing. We fished one tournament out there, and I was drifting side by side, back and forth with another guy from the club, and he must have caught 57 fish, and I caught 7. And at the end of the day, I kind of went over to him, and I kind of peeking in a little bit, and he's got a big jar of scent, and he said he was just dousing his bait in scent, and it made all the difference when it was that tougher bite.
Yeah. Go to Grimsby Tackle and buy yourself a spray bottle of Gulp, or like Tom said, set the hook has got the scent impregnated in it. Another one, swim bait that's absolutely fantastic that Grimsby Tackle has is Kitex. Kitex actually uses ground up squid. You open the package up. If you open it up in the house, your wife's not going to be happy with you. I mean, this stuff stinks, and it works. It flat out works. Gulp is proven for years and years and years and years. It just works. But there's other guys that are using like insect larvae. Craig Butler uses something crazy like that, didn't he, Tommy?
Yeah, the BioEdge stuff. They have all kinds of mealworms and different things. I tend to be a garlic, goby, or minnow imitator. Those are usually the 3 that I use. When I went out and grabbed this stuff out of the boat, I haven't even emptied the boat out this year. Over my compartment, and the garlic just hit me like my locker just reeks of garlic. So
okay, we've got a few more questions filtering in here. Let's catch up on them. So one of the more trendier baits the last few years has been the Ned rigs, and this fella says every time he uses them, he seems to get snagged on bottom. Do you guys use them, and how do you use them?
Tom and I talked.
I'll give you my answer first.
Yeah, go ahead.
My answer first is I've never actually thrown them. That's on my list this year to learn, because I've gotten schooled on those as well. But it's a very light finesse technique, and for me, I'm more of a power fisherman. If it's lighter than a 1/4 ounce, I have a hard time throwing it. But I've seen it work, and the important part there, I think, is a floating bait. A floating bait will help keep that hook off the bottom and stop your jig from falling over. So Freedom will be bringing out some Ned stuff this spring, and Set the Hook makes some brand new Ned baits as well. So I got my orders in already to learn that technique this year. You never stop learning. That's one of the important things.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same thought lines as Tom. I have a real hard time slowing down and finessing. Tom does it with the spy baits, but
and I can do it with the Senko too, but just that open water stuff, I have a hard time.
Yeah, it's difficult, but it works because I've had friends. I've been in their boat and they've been in my boat, and they make me look like a fool with a Ned rig. They definitely 100% work.
Yeah, I got schooled this spring with a chatterbait as well in shallow water. Mm-hmm. So my non-boater in my club tournament, all of a sudden he's started throwing a chatterbait. We were trying, and all of a sudden the chatterbait was like the thing they wanted. And I had never really thrown a chatterbait. I use them all the time for largemouth, but never really for smallmouth. And so adding that to the repertoire as well.
Neat. Another question was wacky worms. Always had good success using them up north. How about them on Erie?
Yeah, it's one of those good toss back baits as well. I tend to use a little 4-inch one, just a little smaller profile, but you can also drop shot the little 4-inch ones. So I love my stick baits for largemouth. Bay of Quinte is my favorite body of water to fish for largemouths, and you have to have some patience because it's again, you got to cast it out and let it fall, and the less you do, the better it works, and that's what the Ned rig is like as well.
Yeah, wacky rigging on drop down. If you have the follow up fish and you just have that lure and it's just slowly falling through the water column, 100% works. Mark, you and I have fished it on my lake up north, or our lake up north, around docks, and it's deadly for smallmouth. There's no reason whatsoever it won't work on Lake Erie.
Okay. Another question is, are there any differences in techniques when for upper river bass and lower river bass?
Yes. Lower river bass can be some of the most frustrating creatures in the world. The very best luck I've had in the lower river is tight to shoreline and throwing this exact bait right here. This is a 90 size Berkeley cutter in the pearl. It looks like a little smelt or a little emerald shiner, and ripping it and jerking it back to the boat. We've had 50 fish smallmouth days on the lower Niagara River. They are few and far in between. For me, the upper river is a much better smallmouth fishery.
What are your thoughts on Carolina rigs?
You got my to-do list. I've started fishing the St. Lawrence River a little bit, last couple of years, and heading out there again. And that's a big one down there, 3/4 ounce to 1 ounce Carolina rig. And it's a great bait for current. It definitely excels in the river systems. I have one rigged up a few times this year, and I never got around to throwing it, but it's one too, again, my learning curve. There's only so much time in the summer, so.
Sure.
The interesting thing about it is there's absolutely no doubt that a Carolina rig is going to work. It's going to work. Is it going to work better than a drop shot, a tube, a swim bait, a jigging spoon? I don't know. But if you watch Major League Fishing, and there was one spot, I think it was on Oneida Lake or Chautauqua Lake or something, they were fishing this bridge. That's all they were throwing. And that's, once again, guys, that's going old school. That's what we used to do back in the day. And there's absolutely no reason it won't work.
It's interesting, like I'm certainly an outsider for the most part for the bass fishing, but I pay attention to the elites and whatnot. That all the attention that the St. Lawrence has been getting the last few years. It'll be interesting to see how many of those techniques and presentations can be brought over and used on the Niagara, even though the rivers are a little different in structure. We don't have all the rocks and the islands obviously, as St. Lawrence does, but it'd be kind of neat to see.
Yeah, it's a little faster current down there, but they also have a lot more like sand flats. So some of the great fishing is on the edges on the sand flats, and I find down our way that we end up the weeds end up growing on those shallow flats. So it takes away that opportunity to do that kind of fishing like they have down there. They don't get the weed growth at all.
That was my next question. I wasn't sure about that. Okay.
Yeah, but a lot of guys are scared of tournaments. You know, our bass clubs have championships, and you know, we tried and hosted a few times down here. We did it one year, but a lot of guys will fish the lake, but they don't want to fish the river. Even avid fishermen sometimes don't want to fish the river because it's a little tougher and a little trickier, and you know, it's not simple, but you know, you put in your time. I saw Joe Felice here on the call, and Joe got a new boat last year, and you know, he's put in the time on Lake Erie and the river, and it's showing in his tournament results. It's just getting out there and learning and fishing with different people too. You know, trying different stuff. Like Richard and I had success throwing that crankbait on the river or on the lake, and then we couldn't get bit on drop shots and anything else in the river. So Richard said, "I'm going to throw this crankbait out in the river," and we were literally just dragging it with the current. And all of a sudden, bang, we're like, "Oh, okay, well, that's interesting." Bang, okay. And then bang, 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 bang. And you know, like I said, we ended up coming 10th in that tournament, but we didn't have a fish till 11:30. And then my battery died at about 1:30 and I had to get towed in, but we still made it back to weigh in. So in 2 hours, and we caught 20 pounds of bass. But, you know, if we had gotten on that sooner and tried different stuff, you just got to throw different stuff out there.
Yeah, I mean, we could have tried a Carolina rig that day and it might have worked on an ounce and a half. It's you know, it's interesting. Get out with different guys and pick their brains. Get out with guys, you know, like that specialize in this kind of stuff that love to fish and just sit there and sit back and watch. My nephew is a incredibly good stick out there. And sometimes I just sit in his boat and I just watch what he does. I've been fishing since I was 5 years old. And
I'm always watching, you know, because sometimes it's just something subtle that the other guy's doing. He's winding a half, you know, reel faster than you, or he's letting the bait sit longer. And sometimes that's all it takes to trigger that bite is just something subtle.
Sure. And maybe while we let people think if they had any more questions on stuff we haven't covered, maybe we just talk briefly. We just touched on it the last minute here. You know, the three of us, we've been part of different clubs over the last few years, and just to the audience, you know, once, you know, hopefully life gets back to normal, maybe sometime this year, if you haven't yet, join a fishing club near you, whether it's, you know, specifically a bass club, if that's your thing, or, you know, the Straight Line Anglers Club. They're multi-species guys. The St. Catharines Game and Fish, you know, they're more about salmon trout trolling. But I know we've met a lot of people, and we've met some of our best friends through fishing and fishing clubs over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. A club like Straight Line Anglers that started probably 30 years ago with the multi-species fishermen. You get out and you start talking to these guys, and they'll invite you into their boat. And these guys, they're crazy good, man. It's unbelievable the quality of fishermen that are out there. I mean, I'm learning every single day. And the day that you stop learning, take up golf, because you know, you've lost interest. It doesn't matter if you're Kevin Van Dam or Richard Brouwer. You're going to learn something all the time. But get out there and enjoy it. I mean, we've got the best fishing, the best freshwater fishing in the world. Hands down. There's nothing that can touch our multi-species trophy fishing. So, yeah, get the kids out there, man. More tackle boxes and less X boxes.
Yep. We had a question come in. Why do the bass return to the shallow waters for a short period in November, and how long do they stay?
Tommy, you there?
From what I've read and tried to figure out, it's almost like a false spawn. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Can you hear me now? it's like a false spawn. Like they'll almost come into, and you'll see them. It's where they were going to spawn in the spring. So they'll come in. It's almost like they're checking it out, move just out from it, so they're not far when it's time to spawn. They can move right in and spawn. So if you're catching them, in certain areas, they should be in that same area, every year around that same time.
Mhm. Yeah. No, and I just back on the club thing. You've been around most of them though. The last few months on the St. Catharines Bassmasters. They certainly have had some neat guests that they've been able to pull in through this Zoom feature. We just had Jeff Gustafson this week. I caught in listening to some of that, and they've had Jacobson and Chris Lane and Hackney and some other cool ones too. So you learn a lot of cool stuff from the clubs as well. So, any other questions? We'll give it a couple minutes. I think we've covered a fair bit of it in a nice amount of time.
Yeah, before we leave, Mark, listen, guys, this pandemic is knocking the snot out of a lot of mom and pop businesses, including the tackle shops. Tom and I and Mark have been in the tackle industry for a number of years. And the one thing that some of us don't realize is like when we don't get ice, a tackle shop like Grimsby Tackle's got tens of thousands of dollars worth of ice fishing gear sitting on their shelves. Let's support them. They're the guys that are running this. You don't see the huge manufacturers doing these Zoom meetings and these Facebook presentations and stuff like that. Get out there, give them a call, place an order, you go pick it right up beside the door there. We got to support these guys, whether it's your Grimsby Tackle or your Peters Tackle or your Erie Tracker. They're your best source of information anywhere.
No, absolutely. We're always trying to point people in the right direction when we can with the information we have. Oh, here comes another couple here. 3. First one. How do you work crankbaits in the river?
Huck and reel. Seriously, cast it out there and crank it down fast to get it to the depth you would.
Yeah.
And just a slow, steady retrieve.
Yeah,
It's not
you're casting it up current.
Yeah.
So you're kind of half dragging it, half reeling it.
Yeah.
Kind of time you'll get snagged, so be prepared to lose it or chase back up after it. But I find that they're banging so hard that it's amazing it doesn't snag more.
Yeah.
I think we might have lost one lure that day, but
yeah, the lures have a huge lip on them. Let that lure work. I mean, a guy by the name of David Fritz designed this lure. He's been designing crankbaits forever. You don't got to impart any kind of special action on them. Fire them out there, whether it's at a 45-degree angle or straight up current or straight down current, and get them down and let them do their work.
And you can use shallower running ones if you don't want to bang bottom. You're a little nervous at first. Use a 12-foot runner. A couple of the fish that Richard caught that day that triggered us actually hit up beside the boat before we started banging them on bottom, but it kind of let us know that the fish were in that area. So you can start out with a 10-foot, 12-foot diver over 20 feet of water and then kind of progress from there.
Okay, here's a neat question. Ever use multiple weights on drop shot rigs to generate more noise? Like having them clanging together.
No, I never have. There's guys out there that will use tungsten weight, and they say that tungsten weight hitting the bottom causes a different noise. I personally don't use tungsten weights because I lose way too many.
They're too expensive in our area.
They're too expensive in our area, but there's no reason why that wouldn't work.
One little trick we've been doing on those too is we found that the smallmouth will actually like to pick up the shiny sinkers. So we've actually been using green or black drop shot weights to kind of hide them into the bottom a little more so that the fish isn't picking up. We did a lot with underwater cameras and watching fish hit baits and it's amazing how often even the perch when you're ice fishing how they'll come up and hit your swivel instead of the actual lure. So using that technology to your advantage, you can see sometimes what's happening.
When using a tube jig, do you cast and retrieve, or do you try and pop it off the bottom like a blade bait?
I like to cast and drag mostly. Yeah.
I like to keep it pinned to the bottom if I can. But every once in a while you get snagged and pop it off, a fish will hit.
Mm-hmm.
So on days like that, sometimes then that's another little signal that, okay, today I got to hop it to get that reaction strike. But, 9 times out of 10, I'm pinning it to the bottom. And I've started using a lot heavier weights to do that, 1/2 and 3/4 ounce. Usually I use those when it's windy to get down. But I'm throwing a lot more heavier weights. And I talked to Bob Izumi, he uses 1 ounce weights on Erie all the time, whether it's slick Tom or whether it's 6-footers out there. He wants that banging into the bottom and staying down there.
Yeah, one of the things that they've started manufacturing now is actually like a goby head for your tube jig. So instead of the long, narrow cylinder that kind of looks like your pinky, it's got a knob on the end of it. So you got to force that knob into the head of the tube jig, and then it's got a rounder profile. It looks exactly like a goby.
Freedom Tackle will actually be bringing those out this summer.
There you go.
Yeah, it just changes the profile of your tube. And because it's forward weighted, it gives it a little different fall as well.
Mm-hmm. I've seen guys squeeze in football heads in tubes as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it all depends also where your hook comes out. It can come out straight out. It can come out at a 45 or the traditional straight up and down. I like the ones that come out kind of on a 45-degree angle for dragging it. But to each his own. I mean, that's where experimentation and getting out there and trying different techniques. Some of the hardest things to do when you're out there and you're catching fish is to start experimenting. Mm-hmm. As anglers, we always want to, oh shoot, the fish aren't biting, so I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. Well, if they're not biting on what normally catches fish, and then you start actually experimenting when you're catching a lot of fish. Yeah. Then try the different techniques.
Well, same thing when we're salmon fishing. We put out a couple of years, new baits in the morning when things are going good, and you don't put your fantasy baits out in the middle of the day when you're trying to get that big bite. So keep your good stuff out when the going's tough. 60-degree or 90-degree on your tube heads?
Ford and Chevy. I'm going to say 90. Richard's going to say 60.
I'm going to say 60 for dragging. I'm going to say 90 for dropping it straight down. However, most of the time, if I'm dropping straight down, I'm going to drop a drop shot 95% of the time over a tube. So Tom's 90, I'm 60.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Yeah. Very good. Well, I don't know. You guys got anything else on your mind? We can wrap it up soon. If not, it's been a good time.
You know what the problem with this Zoom meetings? Like, we can't go for a beer at the Legion after.
I was just thinking that.
Like, really?
Yeah.
I would love to be in Grimsby Legion right now, and then pouring me a pint or having a cold bottle of 50, because that's the only spot in the world you can find it.
Yeah. Soon enough, hopefully. Any thoughts on? I know neither of you have it on your boats yet, but just someone had any thoughts on the Mega 60 and live forward scan feature?
They work. They're absolutely incredible. I don't want to remortgage my house or sell my firstborn.
It's amazing. The pro guys in the U.S. are dropping electronic sponsors so that they can use all 3 manufacturers. So they're using the Humminbird for the 360, so they can see their targets out in front of them. They're using a live scope so they can see the fish with Garmin, and then they're using the Lowrance down imaging and side imaging. So these guys are actually that used to get free stuff from one sponsor are now actually buying their own graphs because they really feel if they don't have it in certain situations, like Lake St. Clair was one last year where the live scope, there's a field of guys in a group and two of the guys didn't have it and couldn't catch a fish. And so they felt that not having the technology cost them money.
Mhm. One that just came in, electronics still. I'm fairly new to side scan. Do you have any advice for trusting my electronics more and getting comfortable?
When you're first using your side scan, set it at 50 feet. On your drop-down menu, you can go 50 feet, 75, 100. Go at 50 feet. And just like for me using my Humminbird, I just leave my my settings the way it is, but you can go into your sensitivity and your contrast and you can pull them darker or lighter. But just spend the time, put your rod away and actually spend the time. Like go to a spot where there's rocks or there's sand or there's weeds and use your trolling motor or your main motor and go beside it. Another thing with side scan, never more than 5 miles an hour. I mean, some guys are really good at higher speeds, but for the most part, you're going to get your best imaging when you're going slow. That's when you're going to get your most detail. Spend a couple of hours just doing it. It's amazing what you'll learn.
And with Lake Erie being so clear, you can actually drive and look at it as well. So start out a little shallower. If you get a really slick calm day, you can see down 25 feet on the water. So you look at your side imaging, you see the rocks, you see the sand piles. You can almost look over and see exactly what you were looking at the side of the boat and zigzag back over it sometimes. And if you see something different, look at it from different angles as well. So if you're going, east to west, and you see a transition and you see the sand, go north and south and see what it looks like on the graph. That will help you identify stuff a little quicker when you do see it. But seat time is your friend with side imaging. The new technology now, you can actually see fish on it. So they have fish reveal and stuff like that. So you can actually start to see shadows. I was on the St. Lawrence River and we were side imaging in 40 or 50 feet of water. And I swear it was a 50-inch muskie I saw down there. You can make out the fins. You can see the shadow on the bottom. It was pretty incredible when you get those, I call them aha moments. So it's like that with anything in fishing. You get an aha moment. You're like, oh, the scent worked, or oh, this is what happened. So you want to create as many aha moments for yourself when you're learning that it kind of sinks in.
Okay, a couple more here. Drop shot hook suggestions. What do you guys like?
I use a Fusion. I love them. Berkeley Fusion drop shot. I use a 1/0 or a 2/0. Lots of guys are using Gamakatsu's fantastic hook. Owner makes a great drop shot. Tommy, don't you use Trocars?
I have Trocars, Owners, Gamakatsu. I try and match it to the size of the bait. So if I'm using a larger, 3-4 inch bait, I'll go to the 1/0. If I'm using something small like a drifter, I will even go to like a number 1, a little bit smaller. I learned that after learning some rainbow fishing with some of these guys that it's amazing how small that little hook can hold a big fish. So I try not to overpower my bait with it. Some guys are also using now straight shank hooks. So you would thread like that drifter onto the hook. So the hook point is coming out closer to the tail and it's helping keep that bait horizontal.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to get on YouTube and check out guys like Aaron Martin, Brian Latimer, Jacob Wheeler, even Scott Martin. These guys, they're crazy the way their minds think, man. I mean, Aaron Martin is like the drop shot king, and the way that guy prepares his drop shotting is crazy. One of the guys that I know up here that is very similar to that is a guy by the name of Derek Stroop. That guy is the drop shot king, man. He'll have 7 rods on his boat with different lengths and different hooks and stuff like that. Great fisherman.
At what depth do you stop using electronics and just sight fish? When the water is clear, of course. That's probably that 12 and under scenario you're talking about, right, Tom?
Yeah. Typically, once you get up that shallow and I can actually see, the areas I'm fishing I've been in before too, so that helps. I know, okay, here's where the break is, and my waypoints are there to kind of guide me. So I use the GPS more than sonar when I'm shallow. I never really trust any feedback I get on shallow fish, because I think if the graph can see them, I should be able to see them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more sight fish for my targets of rocks and breaks, and you'll see the fish as well when you're in the shallows.
So speaking of that, I would say under 12 feet, I seldom use my electronics, to find bottom and stuff like that. But this is where these come in. Glasses.
Yep.
Tom needs glasses. He's got prescription Polaroid glasses. I use a good pair of Polaroid glasses. It's one of those things, guys. It just absolutely 100% makes a huge difference for cutting the glare in the water. And I'm not talking a $10 pair of glasses. I'm talking go and get yourself a good pair. You don't have to spend $400 on a pair of Costas or Maui Jims, but if you can, do it. But if not, like $100 pair of sunglasses that you're going to keep in a foam case somewhere on the boat, and then you're not going to step on like I do.
And you will develop eyes for it. I mean, I'll be on a walk with my wife down the canal, and I'll be, oh, look at that fish. And she's like, where? I don't see it. I'm like, you can't see that? Like, it's right there. Like, even if I don't have my sunglasses on, you develop that sixth sense for just knowing what a fish shadow looks like, or a tail, just, fish is sitting there, but you just see the tail moving kind of thing. So you definitely develop a shallow water feel.
I think a lot of the older guys here might remember the legendary John Slade. John Slade always told me, never look at the water, look through the water. Stop looking at the surface of the water and look through the water at the fish. He's the guy that taught me how to trout fish, and the exact same rules apply for bass fishing. You'll see him moving. You'll see the sheephead all over the place too. And that's that. Hey, this Leduc guy, that's not fair. You're drinking that beer there.
A few of them going on.
And here comes our last one. What tips are you guys using in your GPS? Navionics or the Lake Master for Lake Erie?
I had Navionics. I just bought some new graphs last year, and I got the Lake Master chips. But I didn't find them beneficial for Lake Erie. I hear down south, they're very good on a lot of those reservoirs and stuff. But the Navionics with the 1 foot contours are the way to go. The Lake Master has some smaller lakes, and even like Lake Simcoe on the Lake Master chip, it's in 5 foot increments instead of the 1 foot the Navionics is. So I didn't find it super helpful. It's a little different in certain areas. You'll get some structure that's not necessarily on the map. But even Navionics isn't perfect. I fished a tournament down by Long Point, and there's one little hump on the map in 20 feet of water that came up to 12 feet. And when I started doing side imaging and moving around, I found 6 of those humps that, it wasn't a 2 foot break. It went from 20 feet to 12. And 5 of these humps were not on the map itself. So you still can find little secrets out there that other guys may not have found if you put the time in.
So this is the Navionics chip that I'm using. I just actually got this one today for the front of my boat. It says on it, Navionics plus Canada and Alaska. And it comes in this package, and you've got the little thing that you can plug into your computer, and you can upgrade it for free for a year. I use Navionics almost exclusively on the lower Niagara River and the river and Lake Erie. Up north on my home lake, up in Restoule, there's no Navionic charts on my lake. Mark and I use Lake Master. I use Lake Master all the time, and I've mapped out my entire lake.
The
And
auto chart you're talking about.
Yeah, the auto chart. Yeah, the auto chart from Hummingbird. And I've been fishing that lake for 35 years, and I've discovered spots that I never knew existed.
Yeah, it's pretty cool technology.
Yeah, the one thing that's nice about the Lake Master technology, it's proprietary. So if I do it, I save it, it's mine. With the Navionics, when you're downloading for upgrades, they're taking all of the information that you've charted on yours, and they're using it. Makes it better for everybody. However, like on my camp up north, now I got Joe Blow from Ohio that comes up to my lake and knows all of the spots for his 1 week holiday when I've been trying to fish them for 35 years. So it's kind of a mixed blessing.
All right. Well, I think we'll end it on that note. Thanks, guys, again. Rich, Tom, good seeing you guys again, and we'll catch up in the flesh when we're allowed to.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4-2 Ottawa right now, near the end of the second.
Oh, so we weren't missing much. Okay, good.
Take care, guys. Take care, everyone. Stay tuned as we'll see what other seminars we'll bring throughout the winter. So good night. We'll see you.
Appreciate it, guys.